Welcome to the FY19, financial year 19's introduction to the Job to be Done event for this quarter, leading through uncertainty. Want to give you, if you haven't come across these before, just a high-level understanding of the thinking as it is, a bit of a story behind it. If you need more information, do let me know. But I will give this in a fairly efficient, quick way if I can, as much as Tim can ever do those kind of things without too much dialogue, but I will try. So leading through uncertainty is going to be part of a more comprehensive journey for the year, and you'll hear all about that at the kickoff event later this month. This first piece is one that is the closest familiarity to what we've done previously. You will understand our leading edge conversation, that it's in existence. It's along the lines of that. So it's how do we keep pushing our edges and lead into new and better territory, competitive advantage being a strong part of that, when we don't have full information. So how do we create that in people? How do we create that in teams? How do we create that in the business? Without overdoing it, the uncertainty piece is a fairly obvious kind of environment nowadays for a lot of us. How do we actually lead when we're not entirely sure where we're going to be in 6 months, 12 months time? How do we progress when we haven't got a clarity around exactly what we do need, skill set and tool set to get to that point? But we need to keep moving forward nevertheless. So I think the uncertainty piece is not a sales pitch, but I do think our understanding is the problem lies in that I think leaders need a very different set of skills to lead into this, to lead and to innovate in this space than they would do in their leadership of the day job. This requires a slightly different and subtle skill set difference, which we think is worth us having some dialogue around for the next couple of hours. So the problem is that that's the case. We think the solution is that leaders need to do things differently. They need to very much step away from the dictating role and very much into leading by example. They need to be asking lots of questions rather than making decisions. They need to be focusing on clearing the path and being very agile about that and very responsive to that. So in the moment, what are the team needing for me to do to clear the path to allow them to do what they want to do because of the speed and the need? They need to have the right amount of time and capacity to do this. So how do we protect people from that? How do we make sure that they have the right constraints? We've talked about this in previous events, where to innovate without some guardrails can create chaos. So how do we create some constraints there? And how do we also give them the right tools to be able to do this in a very intentional way? Without a framework or a roadmap or guardrails, all those things we just said, the risk is we don't get the innovation into that unknown space as much as we need, or we get a bunch of mavericks going out and doing some wild stuff with no sense of control. The implications of this is going to be, as I said, is very much around the desire for a competitive advantage. So how do we find that we don't just find the next shiny object, but how do we create a culture that actually genuinely embraces this and leans into this discomfort of the uncertain with glee, because they realize this is going to give them the edge. So how do we do this in a cultural conversation, not in a training event perspective? So that context piece will obviously be fueled by a table conversation and an introduction from the tables, so we'll get as much as we can from them. We then go into the mindset piece. So we go from organizational context to mindset to the main body. And in the mindset piece, obviously here we're going to be talking about the need for leaders to see the situation and the challenge differently, the need for individuals to see the situation differently. I'm going to be suggesting a bit of a kind of a format of we need to think differently, and therefore that leads to what we need to act differently and do. But more importantly, in this kind of environment we're in, we've got to learn to react differently as well. And that is going to be the need for us to be responsive and agile, but still maintain a sense of leadership in that kind of confusion. So acting differently could be, we've got to start handling increasingly kind of complex kind of cognitive problems. We've got to really switch on our kind of agility in our headspace. We've got to think very divergently about new ways of doing things. We can't sit here and say that what we did last time is going to work this time. We've got to be willing to be able to let go and look for new and better ways of doing things. We've got to make decisions very quickly, particularly when we haven't got all the information. So the thinking differently is significant. The acting differently, we need to be able to constantly accept that our influence might change as we move into spaces that are unknown. We've got to accept that our power, if you like, in the organization might need to be flexing a bit more. We've got to be able to let go. We mustn't always sit there with the hierarchy that we have. We've got to be willing to listen to people with, day two of the organization if they've got good ideas, which does bring us onto the idea of just embracing and celebrating different work patterns, different interests, different ideas. Be willing to try and fail and try again. These are ways that we've got to act differently in this kind of increasingly ambiguous space. In terms of reacting differently, we've got to tolerate more risk, more ambiguity, obviously. We've got to show some resilience when change is constantly coming at us, and we've got to help people to build that resilience in themselves. We've got to be brave. I think we've got to bring back in that bravery piece to challenge when things aren't going the right way. We've got to challenge things because of the uncertainty of where we're going. There's no one that's going to have the singular answer to this. And I think in some ways that sense of leadership is the confidence to lead in the midst of that change and to lead the change through the teams and be willing to kind of be brave and get out there and maybe be more exposed. So the think, act and react differently, I think we need to just set that up as a lens for people to consider. And then we get into the main body. And the main body is going to be made up of 3 levels. We're going to talk about leading myself, leading the teams, and leading the business. In the leading myself piece, when we're talking about leading through uncertainty, we do need to emphasize that we've got to emphasize this concept of resilience that sits in the background. How do we build people's capability to deal with the complexity that comes with uncertainty? And part of that framing is going to be around using the very familiar language of leading edge, which is how do we work at the edge? What does the edge mean? And how do we learn to not react at the edge, but to be proactive? And that would bring in our stimulus and response model from Habit 1. So how do we learn to be more proactive, which we learn from 7 Habits? That's the same applied at the edge, is how do we learn not to react at the edge, but how do we learn to stay at the edge a bit longer by using the stimulus and response and the endowments that sit in there. So leading myself is going to be touching on that. We then go into the team space, is how do we then enable others to do the same as us and actually lean into the edge and be comfortable and embrace it. And we're going to emphasize this around our trust content. So we're going to be looking at probably anchoring around relationship trust. How do we create some team behaviors for us to feel that people have permission to operate at that edge? So if we want people to start to experiment, maybe we need to have that as being part of some of our behaviors that we normalize and we have as part of a charter and a commitment to each other. So we'll use our 13 behaviors, but we'll open it up a bit and use that as a permission to act, a safety to fail, if you like, as being a team cultural norm. And then we get into the kind of organizational space. And in here, what we're going to be looking at emphasizing is the whole concept of clear the path. So it's about alignment and that people will do what the system is often driving them to do or not do. So if we want people to start to go across the edge and to be brave and to try and experiment, do we have the systems and the processes set up to allow that? Do we have leaders showing up as not trying to motivate people to do this, but to clear the path so people are enabled to do this in a safe way? So this is about trying to begin to just look at what the organizational leadership needs to do to create the right environment for this to happen. And then that's it, pretty much. We've got our impact journeys at the back end, but it's trying to maintain a bit of a structure that we can try and replicate in each of these events in a similar way. The leading self, leading teams, leading the business, again, will probably be a consistent framework for the main body. What can individuals do? What can teams do? And what can organizations do to, in this case, lead through uncertainty? And we leave them with small nuggets that they can think about. But the intention is that the main body of lead myself, lead the teams, and lead the business will eventually end up with the ability for you to go back into clients and talk about this in a programmatic way of saying, this is what we believe you can do with your people to kind of over a period of 6 to 8 to 12 months that you can start running through as an impact journey. You start with leading ourselves. What do we need to do to invest in individuals' ability to be able to lead through uncertainty? In the team space, how do we accelerate results by enabling teams to be able to play at that edge more, deal with uncertainty, experiment, try new ideas out? And then the final piece is, what does the organization need to do to be able to align the system to be in support of what we're asking from our teams and from our individuals? And we'll try and map that in every one of the Job to Be Done events so that you'll get used to the story as having those three waves to it: self, team, and business within the OE. We just changed the topic and changed the discussion. So look, I'll say no more at this stage, but I hope that gives you a sense of it. The workbook is being worked on now. When I get a deck done, I will send that out to you so you get a sense of what we're going to cover. If in the meantime, again, you're getting conversations where you're feeling a bit stuck, give me a shout. I will talk it through, but I hope this will give you enough to be able to at least have some initial conversations with clients in terms of invitations to the event. I'll say no more at this stage. If there are any questions, please come back to me. Thanks very much, and speak to you soon. Thanks.